The morning arrives like a held breath, the low sun brushing the edges of a cold, endless sky. On the ground, the airfields wake in a flurry. Mechanics in oil-stained coveralls bending over engines, crews passing clipped orders beneath steaming coffee, and young pilots pulling on leather gloves with hands that do not yet tremble openly. In the distance, the silhouette of a squadron rises, metal birds catching the first light and throwing it back like a challenge. Above, the sky is deceptively calm, but history has taught these men to read the hush, the stillness before the machine gun coughs, before tracer light etches living lines through clouds. They climb, the earth sliding away beneath them until villages become postage stamps and river bends a memory. Each aircraft, a Spitfire, a Messerschmitt, a Hurricane, is a small world of wiring and courage, a fragile cathedral of aluminum and hope. The pilots feel the machine beneath their hands, hear the heartbeat of its engine, and think not of glory, but of duty. Radio crackles, a human voice turning the enormous into the intimate. Coordinates, altitude, enemy sighted. The squadron tightens like a fist. Formation becomes shield. The wings are not metal, but the living geometry of survival. Below, the countryside stretches. Above it, clouds gather like witnesses. Every man knows that the sky does not favor the timid. It favors the decisive, the disciplined, the brave. This morning will keep its secrets until they are spilled in smoke and iron. For now there is only ascent, the ritual of engines, the prayer of a pilot, small, private, repeated under the canopy. Bring us home. The sun climbs, and with it the tension. War for one brief hour will be decided by split-second choices, by the temper of a single man at his controls. The sky, indifferent and infinite, waits.
The warning comes not with a trumpet, but with beeps, a line across a cathode ray tube, a blip that will change the course of an ordinary morning. In the bunker, men trace that small light with gloved fingers and faces hollow from long nights. They pass the information with a practiced calm, the kind that masks the knowledge of what that tiny dot can become. Air raid sirens do not wail for ceremony, they wail for survival. Hangars burst open, pilots sprint, leather jackets flapping, helmets snagging on straps, boots thudding across tarmac slick with dew. Engines roar to life like beasts awakened. Pilots slide into cockpits with the efficiency of men who have rehearsed panic until it becomes routine. The air is a prismatic chaos of pre-flight checks and last orders, of tongues attempting jokes that die in the chlorine-thin air. A wing commander gives a curt nod. The radio hisses distance and bearing. A squadron lifts as one, the earth shrinking away under the thrum of propellers. There is no time to taste fear, there is only the tempo of procedure. Check, throttle, climb. As they climb, the radio becomes a thread connecting them, a lifeline spun through cloud and altitude. The blip grows into shapes, then outlines. Soon the sky is not empty, and the business of war begins. Eyes scan the horizon, searching for the enemy's silhouette against the pale blue. Each pilot understands the arithmetic of the sky. Altitude gives energy. Speed buys options. Numbers change the rules. Strategy becomes instinct, a glance, a nudge of the stick, a breath held long enough that it leaves frost on the canopy. Below them, towns continue in ignorant peace. Above, men make choices that will echo down to those streets. The radar warned them. Now sight confirms. The tone of the mission morphs from urgency to hunger. The chase is not yet blood, it is promise. The promise of contact turned clash. The pilots straighten their backs,
tighten their grip, and the sky narrows into a corridor where men meet metal.
At first, it is a shadow, a dark smudge against sunlight, then a formation, precise and purposeful. The enemy reveals itself with the quiet arrogance of machines confident in their purpose. For a moment, the two sides simply float in the same airspace, assessing, computing, measuring. Then tactics bloom, feints and counters, wings flexing like a school of fish, each pilot a single neuron in a larger mind. The first exchange of fire is small, almost ceremonial, a puff of smoke, a tracer line arcing like a calligraphy stroke across the heavens. But then physics takes over. Energy and angle, lift and drag, the cold math of aerial combat dictating who will climb and who will dive. A pilot times his role by memory, not by watch. He knows the feel of his machine better than he knows his reflection. Cockpits become altars of concentration. Through the plexiglass, the world is reduced to speed indicators, fuel gauges, and the enemy's tail. A shout over the radio, orders, warnings, the human inhumanity of distance cuts through the whine of engines. The sky becomes a map of choices. Who will commit? Who will bait? Who will break formation? Tracers stitch temporary constellations, and airplanes that were once proud and whole begin to show the first wounds. Oil trails, a jagged wingtip, a wounded throttle that coughs and sighs. The men inside do not see themselves as heroes. They see their tasks, to survive, to protect, to hold the line long enough for comrades to return. Moments stretch and snap with the speed of a bullet. A plane goes dark as it spirals, a thin black line against the clouds. Another rights itself, triumphant, yet scarred. In those minutes, all theory dissolves into action. Training meets improvisation. Courage is not courageous in the abstract. It is practical. A calculated roll, an unexpected climb, a reluctant break. By the time the smoke thins, something irrevocable has been decided. A shift in altitude, a tally of losses, the weary mathematics of victory and grief.
The dogfight is an animal with a fierce appetite. It devours distance, patience, and sometimes lives. In its center, sound is a single choking chorus. Engine screaming, metal lamenting under bullet strikes, the metallic cracking of stressed aluminum. Pilots feel everything at once. The smell of oil and cordite, the sting of adrenaline, the urge to push harder even when the plane protests. Maneuvers that in training were described in polished diagrams now become raw improvisations. Tactics are sentient here. A half roll morphs into a scissor turn, a dive into a climbing scissors that trades speed for position. Pilots trade places with death by the breath of a propeller. When a tracer line finds its mark, a wing tears like paper, and the physics of flight rearrange themselves around the new wound. Yet cleverness often wins where force cannot. A pilot feints left and then snaps right, using the opponent's momentum against him. Another plays the sun, forcing his adversary to fight through glare and lost sight. Radios are full of terse calls and curses, names, coordinates, desperate pleas for cover. Amid the chaos, small acts of humanity occur. A wingman blocks an attacker's firing arc. A damaged pilot signals a retreat to a friend who will not leave his side. Those are the quiet contracts that bind men to one another across the void. Time becomes fractured. Minutes dilate into an eternity as the human nervous system translates speed into a slow-motion ballet. Machines grow warm to the touch. Instruments twitch from overload. When a plane goes down, the sound it makes is something like a small death, the thin whine that fades, the final metallic sigh. Survivors will remember details with the clarity of nightmares, a particular shade of orange in an explosion, the way smoke drifted like a wounded animal, the precise wording of a last radio call. When the dust settles, there is no applause, only the calculus of losses and the muted relief of those who breathed through the worst. The sky remains indifferent, but through it all, a story has been written in burn marks and scorched cloud.
An aircraft in flame is a terrible, beautiful thing. Terrible for the life within, beautiful for the clarity it forces upon the living. The explosion arrives as a punctuation mark, brilliant, immediate, then devastatingly slow as metal fragments arc away and the canopy clouds with smoke. The pilot's world contracts into a hot point of pain and sound. Instruments spin, dials forget their jobs, and the cockpit becomes a furnace of decisions. Fight the fire, cut the engine, jump. Below, those who witness it hold a small, solemn vigil in their hearts. Comrades who have flown together for months or weeks are reduced to silhouettes and memories. The radio fills with urgent instructions: bail out, descend to a safe altitude, mark the crash site. For the man inside, parachute becomes the final argument between life and loss. For those watching, it becomes the unseen scar that will not heal easily. A friend extinguished, a future rewritten. Loss shapes survivors in small, cumulative ways. The squadron returns with quieter voices, with hands that pause over controls just a fraction longer, as if the memory of flames might still cling to the metal. Yet the mission presses on. War tolerates mourning only insofar as it allows men to continue. They fold grief into duty, into the next pre-flight check, into the oath to defend one another in the next encounter. On the ground, those sent to search for the crash will find wreckage and perhaps a parachute, or sometimes nothing at all. The landscape receives the fallen gently, unconcerned with the narratives men build around them. Families will be told in measured words, letters sent across oceans in ink that tremble. The names of the lost are recorded, honored, and then the world keeps turning. Not because it wishes to forget, but because memory itself must be carried forward as the living continue their work. The cost is not only metal and territory, it is the tally of small lives rearranged. In a sky contest where victories are measured in minutes, the deepest losses are those that settle into a man's chest like a stone.
After the worst of the battle, commanders take stock. Pilots who were once a single formation scatter back into groups, repairing, regrouping, and preparing for what comes next. Yet war is not a single clash. It is a series of decisions stitched together by endurance. The tide turns not on a single heroic act, but in the accumulation of choices. A new tactic, a daring interception, the arrival of reinforcements. In the debrief, voices are steady and sharp. Men speak not of fear, but of observation. Which maneuvers worked, what angles were lethal, what the enemy's patterns revealed. These conversations are the laboratory where survival is engineered. A tweak in formation here, the dedication of an escort there, and suddenly the odds change. The sky that once seemed an arbitrary gauntlet becomes, through human ingenuity, a place where advantage can be carved out. Out in the air, a commander takes a risk, a flanking maneuver, a high-speed slalom through cloud to gain energy advantage. The pilots obey because trust in the leader is their last common currency. One daring move takes them behind the enemy line, and what had been defense becomes offense. Pressure mounts on the opposing pilots, who now must respond to an unexpected tempo. Momentum slides like water toward the side that forces change. The battlefield is a teacher with a hard hand. Pilots learn to read not only the hardware, but the psychology of their opponents. They set traps, a slow turn to bait an overeager foe, a staged retreat to open a firing window. In these maneuvers, courage is calibrated by cunning. When a decisive moment comes, it is rarely clean. It is messy, noisy, full of improvisation. A wing tears, a plane lists, and through grit and ingenuity, some manage to break the enemy's will. When the squadron returns, the faces are tired but resolute. They have measured the enemy and found them beatable. The tide has shifted, not because war is fair, but because men adapted, and adaptation breeds advantage. The small victories, a protected convoy, one fewer enemy sortie, accumulate until they become strategy.
Heroism in the sky is rarely the flamboyant cinematic moment movies sell. It lives in small, precise acts performed under pressure. It is a wingman who refuses to leave a stricken friend, circling low and drawing fire while the wounded pilot nurses his machine. It is a pilot who sacrifices his fuel to lure an enemy away from a formation, giving his comrades a chance to escape. These are choices that do not guarantee reward, only the chance for someone else to live another day. Inside a cockpit, heroism is measured in microseconds and muscle memory. A pilot sensing a stall corrects instantly. One with a wounded engine chooses the cliff of a field over the teeth of a city. The choices are never purely noble or purely selfish. Survival informs every action. Yet within that calculus, there is room for compassion and camaraderie. Men share their life with men who might be strangers until they meet in the sky and become brothers. Letters home found in the pockets of uniforms reveal the human stories that flight logs cannot capture. A first love, a promised child, a dream deferred. These private narratives give weight to the public acts of combat. They remind us that every aircraft, however instrumental, carries a person with a life outside the mission. Pilots fly not for personal glory, but to protect those lives, to honor promises, to return to laughter and bread and small, ordinary things. When a pilot returns from a near-death encounter and is greeted by his squadron with relieved smiles, the moment is not cinematic, but profound. It is the human handshake across the rubble of fear. We remember heroism not because it is rare, but because it crystallizes into acts of care. An offered spare jacket, a cigarette shared in the cold, a quiet word in the dark of a hangar. These small acts accumulate into culture. They make a squadron more than a unit. They make it a family. And families endure long after battles end, carrying the memory of what was risked and what was saved.
The return flight is a different kind of silence. Engines thrum with the exhausted steadiness of survivors, and the horizon tilts toward home. Damaged aircraft limn the sky like wounded birds, their pilots steadying hands over controls that have seen too much. As they cross back over familiar landmarks, the world below seems to pulse with mundane life. A farmer tending fields, a child waving, a church bell clanging. These ordinary sounds are the true measure of what they fight for. Debriefing rooms smell of cigarette smoke and lingering grease. Men take off their helmets and become small again, ordinary in the presence of those who understand. They trade reports, file claims for repairs, and mention names, the lost and the saved. The relief is practical. Repair parts ordered, ribbons noted, leave negotiated. But beneath the paperwork, there is a quieter, more stubborn process: healing. Memory does the work of stitching. Pilots replay maneuvers in their minds as a surgeon might replay an operation, looking for what could have been done better. They laugh with a brittle edge at things that were absurd and weep in private for friends who never returned. Night after night, some will sleep fine. Others will find their dreams populated by wings and alarms. The world does not end for those who survive,
but it changes. They carry the nap of the sky in their bones. In years to come, these men will speak softly of the day's battle, choosing words like souvenirs rather than trophies. They will visit graves, sign letters, and pass on their knowledge to novices who will one day take up the same cramped seats. The sky will be the same canvas, indifferent and immense, but their relation to it will be transformed, less naive, more respectful, deeply aware of the thinness between life and the clouds. As dusk settles, the squadron disperses into small lights on the airfield. Engines cool. Men step out into air that suddenly smells sweeter. They have returned, and with return comes reflection, a slow, deliberate accounting of what was won, what was lost, and what it means to be alive in the months and years that follow.